nervous system carries out a complex array of tasks. It allows us to sense smell, produce speech, control body movements, regulate internal organs, and remember past events. These diverse activities can be grouped into three basic functions: to collect and transmit sensory input, integrate or process that information, and then produce a motor output. So the sensory function of the nervous system involves sensory receptors, which detect internal stimuli, such as an increase in blood pressure, or external stimuli, such as a raindrop landing on your arm. This sensory information is then carried into the brain and spinal cord through our cranial and spinal nerves. The integrative function processes sensory information by analysing it and making decisions for an appropriate response or non-response. And once the sensory information is integrated, the nervous system may elicit an appropriate motor response by activating effectors, which can be muscles or glands. Stimulation of an effector causes an output, such as a muscle contracting to produce movement or the secretion of a gland. So giving you an example to provide a bit of context for those functions, and let's say you've been out and about in the middle of summer, it's quite hot, and you've become dehydrated. Osmoreceptors, which are the receptors that detect osmolarity or the water content of your blood, will detect that you are dehydrated. This sensory information will then be transmitted into the spinal cord and brain from those receptors along a sensory pathway. Upon reaching the brain, and specifically the hypothalamus of the brain in this scenario, and this sensory information will be integrated with other relevant sensory information, such as the environmental conditions or the context, and an appropriate outcome will be decided. In this situation, in an environment where a person has access to a glass of water, the appropriate outcome would be to pick that glass up and have a drink. In this scenario, the relevant muscles required to pick that glass up would be stimulated. This motor information will be transmitted from the brain down a motor pathway to our effector. The outcome will be that this person will then contract their muscles, pick up that glass, and have a drink. So moving on from what the nervous system does to what the nervous system is made up of and how it's organised. And the human nervous system consists of billions of neurons and even more neuroglia or supporting cells. This complex and intricate network of cells can be organised into two main subdivisions. The central nervous system, or CNS, consists of the brain and the spinal cord. The brain is the part of the central nervous system that sits within the skull. The spinal cord is attached to the brain and sits down the middle of our vertebral column. The central nervous system processes many different kinds of incoming sensory information. It's a source of our thoughts, emotions, and memories. And most of the signals to stimulate muscles to contract or glands to secrete also originate from our central nervous system. The peripheral nervous system is then all of the nervous tissue outside of the central nervous system. Components of the peripheral nervous system consist of our cranial and our spinal nerves, which are the nerves that exit the brain and then the spinal cord respectively. The ganglia, which are these small swellings of nervous tissue here, which are made up mostly of neuronal cell bodies. Enteric plexuses, which are networks of neurons located in the walls of the organs in our gastrointestinal tract. And then also various sensory receptors, which are the structures that monitor those internal and external changes in the environment, and include things like touch receptors in the skin, photoreceptors in the eye, and olfactory receptors in the nose. All of the nervous tissue of the peripheral nervous system is then divided further into a somatic nervous system, an autonomic nervous system, and an enteric nervous system. The somatic nervous system consists of sensory neurons that convey information to the central nervous system from somatic receptors in the head, body, and limbs, and then also receptors from our special senses, so vision, hearing, taste, and smell. It then also consists of motor neurons, which transmit information from the central nervous system to our skeletal muscles only. So these are the muscles of the body that attach to bone and can be voluntarily controlled. The autonomic nervous system then consists of sensory receptors which convey information to the central nervous system from our autonomic sensory receptors. So these are located primarily in visceral or soft organs of the body, such as our stomach or the lungs. And then motor neurons that transmit information from the central nervous system to our smooth muscle, our cardiac muscle, and our glands, which are all effectors that are under involuntary control. So we can't consciously control these organs and they just work automatically. The motor portion of our autonomic nervous system is then further divided into two branches or two divisions. We have the sympathetic division of the nervous system and then the parasympathetic division. These divisions will focus on entirely in a future module. However, typically, effectors receive input from both sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions of the autonomic nervous system, with the two divisions having opposing effects. For example, the sympathetic nervous system, which is also referred to as the division of the nervous system responsible for fight or flight, will increase heart rate, whereas the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the division which is responsible for rest and digest, will typically reduce heart rate. The enteric nervous system, which is sometimes also just called the brain of the gut, is a division of the nervous system which is also involuntary. It was actually once considered part of the autonomic nervous system, but it's over 1 million neurons in enteric plexuses that extend the length of the gastrointestinal tract. So sensory neurons within the enteric nervous system monitor chemical changes within the gastrointestinal tract, as well as stretching of organs like the stomach and the intestinal walls. Enteric motor neurons will govern the contractions of smooth muscle in the stomach and the intestines to propel food forward, as well as the secretion of various digestive acids and hormones. Now, some of these activities can take place without the involvement of the central nervous system, which is why it is often separate to our autonomic nervous system. So putting all of that together in one slide for you, which is something that you might like to do on your own as part of your own revision. And the nervous system is divided globally into the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. The central nervous system is made up of the brain, which sits inside the skull, and the spinal cord, which extends down from the brain and is found within the vertebral column. The peripheral nervous system then consists of all of the nervous tissue sitting outside of the central nervous system. This includes the cranial and spinal nerves that exit the brain, the brainstem, and the spinal cord, the ganglia or the clusters of cell bodies, the enteric plexuses in the gut, and then all of the various receptors. The peripheral nervous system is then further divided into three sections. The somatic nervous system, which includes somatic and special sense receptors. These transmit sensory information to the central nervous system. And then motor neurons, which transmit motor information from the central nervous system to our skeletal muscles. The autonomic nervous system contains receptors in the visceral or soft organs like the heart, the lungs, the liver. They transmit sensory information via sensory neurons to the central nervous system. Then we have motor neurons, which transmit motor information from the central nervous system to our cardiac muscle our smooth muscle, and our glands, which are all the effectors that we can't consciously control. The motor division of the autonomic nervous system is also then further divided into our sympathetic and our parasympathetic divisions. The effectors that are innervated by the sympathetic division produce fight or flight responses, so increasing heart rate, increasing your respiratory rate or how fast you breathe, increasing blood flow to the brain and muscles. The effectors that are innervated by the parasympathetic division produce rest and digest activities, such as increasing the rate of digestion, slowing heart rate, and increasing the filtration of blood. The third division of the peripheral nervous system is the enteric nervous system. This system consists of receptors and sensory neurons that monitor chemical changes and the degree of stretch in the organs of the gastrointestinal tract, so the stomach and the intestines. And then the motor division, which is responsible for the contraction of smooth muscle, which moves our food forward through our gastrointestinal tract. And the secretion of glands and endocrine cells, which produce acids and hormones that aid in digestion. Although the functions of the motor division of the enteric nervous system are under involuntary control, it does not always require input from the central nervous system, and that's why it gets its own division and is not just part of the autonomic nervous system.